Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. I wanted to start off by saying thank you for the support on my previous video and welcome to the new subscribers to my channel. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and turn on the notification button if you want to see more military related content like the last video and this video. So in today's video, I want to cover the F-35 Bravo variant specifically. There's three variants with the F-35, which is the Alpha variant, which is in service with the United States Air Force, the Bravo variant, which is in service with the United States Marine Corps, and the Charlie variant, which is the naval variation, which is in service with the United States Marines. Before I get into this video though, I want to clear up a misconception real quick that a lot of people have with fighter jets like the F-35. So first of all, the stealth does not make it invisible. It can still be detected by super sophisticated radars if the F-35 is close enough. A lot of people think that detectability and targeting are the same thing. So here's the difference between detectability and targeting. So a low frequency radar will be able to see the F-35, but the high frequency radar will not be able to see the F-35. And to get a firing solution, the high frequency radar needs to be able to see where the F-35 is at. And so without a firing solution, the survivability of the F-35 is increased. And that's the entire point about the F-35, is to increase survivability of the pilots and the airframe. It is not to be completely invisible. So now that the misconception is out of the way, we're going to get to the F-35. I will be making a separate video where it's just misconceptions, but just for today, we're going to just be focusing on the F-35 and its capabilities. A real quick overview on how radar works. These arrows right here, this represents the radar waves that are sent from enemy radars. So as the waves, they travel through the air, they have to hit something, and once they hit something, that's when they return back. So until it doesn't hit anything, or like a solid object, it will continue going straight forward. But right here, we have a solid object right here. So what's gonna happen is that each of these radar waves, they're gonna hit right here, and it's going to return back. So depending on the return of these radar waves, it will determine how big it will show up on radar. The more that returns right back to the radar receiver, the larger this object will appear on radar. And the larger something appears on radar, the easier it is to target it. So let's take a look at how the serrated edges of the F-35 absorb or reflect radar. So it mainly reflects radar, it doesn't absorb much. However, the F-35 does have a paint that is radar absorbent. The materials of it are able to absorb electromagnetic waves. So with that in mind, if some of these go through here and reaches the paint, then it's just not going to come back out. The aircraft just absorbs it. So let's see what the serrated edges do before it reaches the paint. So two things will happen. So either the paint will absorb it once it manages to get through, or the serrated edges will reflect it away. So let's just say if one radar signal comes in through here, or a radar wave comes in through here, my apologies. So it will bounce off of here, and it's going to go over here. It's going to bounce off again. It's going to bounce off again, and then it will make its way down, or and it will be absorbed into the paint, or it will bounce away and it's just not going to return back to where it came from. And this will reduce the strength of the signal. And this can be seen on many parts of the F-35. If you look at the landing gear, it will have the door for the landing gear will be serrated. The other parts of the F-35, such as the flare door hatch, and then the jammer hatch where the jammer rests, and whenever it opens, you'll see that there's serrated edges over here. And this is so that whenever they do open, it keeps the F-35's radar cross-section as small as possible. So I have this picture right here of the F-35. And so normally with most traditional non-stealth aircraft, what they will do with the weapons, and such as like the missiles or the bombs, they'll have weapon pylons on the wings over here. But if you notice, the F-35 does not have the weapons pylons for the missiles or the bombs on its wings. The reason is because it carries the weapons internally inside of the aircraft. The reason for this is because it will reduce the surface area of the F-35, and it will give radar less area for it to bounce back towards its receiver. So carrying the weapons inside helps the F-35 maintain even a better and smaller radar cross-section. If it were to carry it on the outside, it would be compromising its stealth. There are in some cases that there will be weapons pylons on the outside of the F-35, but that's only if it's in its beast mode configuration. This configuration will only happen if the stealth is no longer a concern, such as if like the missile defense systems of an enemy country are no longer useful. What they'll do is that they'll add the weapon pylons on here because there is no concern for stealth. And so in that situation, they would be maximizing the amount of firepower. But most of the time, it will always carry its weapons on the inside, so it will maintain a small radar cross-section. Let's talk a little bit about G-forces and how it would affect the F-35. So G-forces is basically the acceleration of gravity on the pilot and the airframe, such as the F-35. So the airframe of the F-35 is like molded like these serrated edges and these like curves that deflect radar away. So the F-35, if it goes into a very high G-pull, what will happen is that the airframe can sometimes bend a little bit and thus compromising the stealth of the aircraft. It will bend some of the curves out of place, it will bend some of the serrated edges out of place, and this will make it easier for radar to return back to its source and detecting the F-35. So there's many ways that we stop this from happening, and it is frequent inspections. When an F-35 flies and it comes back to land, it has to be inspected. Every aircraft has to be inspected because it is such a fragile piece of equipment, and when it's flying around in the air, if it were to fail in the air, it would put the pilot's life at risk and it would put people's lives on the ground at risk. So aircrafts such as the F-16, F-15, AC-130, any aircraft, just take that for example, they all have to be maintained very closely so they don't fail at what they do. The F-35 requires a lot more inspection time compared to the F-16. This is because the F-35 has a lot of very small details that need to be inspected. If it's not inspected, it could compromise the stealth of the aircraft and thus making the aircraft useless. Here's some more interesting smaller details about the F-35. So if you're wondering what these holes right here are, these are the engines of the F-35. If you'll notice with the older aircraft such as the F-15 and the F-16, their engines are normally lying either under the aircraft right here or on the sides, and they're these like really massive engines. But the reason why the F-35 has its engines up here is to reduce stealth. So like I said, the bigger something is, the stronger its return is going to be. So if you have like a low-lying engine right here, like the F-16, or if you have those two really big inlets for the F-15 right here, it will increase the radar cross-section of the aircraft. So what the engineers of the F-35 did were they put the engines very close to the fuselage to minimize radar cross-section as much as they can. You can see this on the F-22 Raptor as well. They have the engines that are quite close to the fuselage. You'll also notice there's a lot of similarities between the F-35 and the F-22 on how they're built. Another interesting feature of the F-35, if you'll notice right here, is that the wings are slanted. And it's not just because of aerodynamics or anything like that. Or the reason why it is like it's shown here is that whenever radar hits it, it's gonna bounce away over here because of the angle of it. If you'll notice the F-16, it has like a straight up tail, and what it'll do is that the radar will sometimes bounce off the tail and hit its fin right here. I'll demonstrate it in the next clip. If you notice right here, this is the tail section of the F-16. So the F-16 has a straight up single tail right here compared to the F-35, which has two right here. So the F-16, what its biggest weakness is that whenever a radar hits the tail of the F-35, what will end up happening is that it will deflect down, it'll touch right here, and then it'll return back to where it came from. So whenever radar gets to touch as much of the aircraft as possible, it will send a bigger signal back to the radar receiver. So to minimize this on the F-35, what they have done here is that whenever the radar signal hits the tail of the plane, it does not go down here, but instead it goes somewhere over here. So the engineers at Lockheed Martin knew that they had to make the vertical fins slanted so that when the radar would hit the fins of the aircraft, it would not bounce down like here with the F-16. Their main goal was to reduce the amount of scattering, because more scattering means that the aircraft will appear larger on radar. Another issue that the engineers at Lockheed Martin came across was with radar is that whenever a radar wave is traveling through the air, and once it hits the F-35, what it will do is that it will sometimes travel across the F-35. and when it makes its return back to the radar receiver, the signal of the return will be really big because it's traveling all across the aircraft. There's a way that the engineers at Lockheed Martin found a way to counteract this. So the way that the engineers counteracted this problem was that they treated the surface of the F-35 with a radar absorbing tape. So similar to the radar absorbing paint, the radar absorbing tape is literally just tape with radar absorbing properties on it. So what they'll do is that they'll put some radar absorbing tape across the body of the aircraft or along with the body of the aircraft. This way, when the radar comes through and travels along the body of the aircraft, it will scatter less, and by the time it returns back to its source, the strength of the return will be even smaller. This greatly increases the stealth of the F-35. Moving on to the final topic of today's video regarding the stealth capabilities of the F-35. So the canopy of the aircraft is probably one of the biggest weaknesses regarding the F-35's stealth capabilities. So the canopy is basically where the pilot sits and can look out of. So obviously it needs to be glass, and if it's not glass, your pilot can't see out of it. The issue with that is that whenever something is transparent, radar can penetrate it. It will go right through it. And if you don't know about anything about fighter jets, the cockpit is one of the most detailed parts of the plane. You have your control stick, you have your engine power, you have buttons for different things on the aircraft. So when radar manages to penetrate through the canopy, it will bounce off all of these special instruments, all these special buttons and stuff like that. And when it returns to its source, what will happen is that there's a very big strength in return from when the radar penetrated the canopy and bounced off all of these things. That's a very big issue with stealth aircraft. To solve this canopy issue, the engineers of the F-35 had to use a material that was transparent but would also absorb radar waves. So they chose this sort of glass material that was transparent, but it was like really bright in color. It's very bright to the human eye. Like, a lot of people can tell if a fighter jet is stealth just by looking at the canopy, if it's like a very bright color. So many people would say if it's a stealth aircraft, it needs to be undetected, right? Or untargetable. So why would you put something so bright on there that the human eye could see? So it doesn't really matter what the human eye can see. It matters what the radar can see. Because if your radar cannot see the aircraft, you cannot target the aircraft. But if you can see it yourself, you yourself cannot do anything without the help of the radar, which will let the missile or any other air defense know where to shoot the aircraft at. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's video. In the next video for the F-35, the part 2 version, I'm going to be going over the sensor suite and the situational awareness of the F-35. Today's video was just the stealth capabilities. There's a lot to cover about this aircraft, and this aircraft is really complex, so it's kind of hard to explain, but I hope my video will help you understand why the F-35 is such a great aircraft. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to hit the like button if you like the video, and make sure you subscribe and turn on the post notification bell if you want to see more military related content. Thank you, and goodbye for now.